Welcome to the David Wells Experience, featuring David Wells, who's an advocate against bullying. Now, through his nonprofit organization, which is called Chocolate Jazz Foundation, it helps him to bring awareness against bullying. David Wells is a nationally known smooth jazz artist, and the David Wells Experience is a weekly show that is a motivational, informative, and inspirational program. The show consists of interviews with people of all trades that can provide insight and guidance to those who have been bullied, like making right choices, never giving up, desire, discipline, determination, and many more tools to use in the fight against bullying. Now, this episode is brought to you by Legion Jiu Jitsu, located in Nashville, Hendersonville, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They have classes for kids starting at age 3, teaching neutralization and control with the bully-proof curriculum. If you have any questions, feel free to call 615-203-5004, or you can go to the website at legionjj.com. And be sure to mention David Wells Experience, and you'll receive 1 week of free classes per family. Now, this episode is also brought to you by Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Woodmont Realty. If you own a home in Middle Tennessee, then you'll know exactly what David's talking about. The housing market is crazy. It's a seller's market. He asks you a question. If the price is right and the timing is right, would you sell? As a realtor of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Woodmont Realty, if you want David to email you an accurate comparative market analysis on your home, text him at 304-494-2238. So if you're ready to get started with the David Wells Experience, here's your host, David Wells.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in to another episode, and today we have a former U.S. Army Airborne Ranger and Special Forces Green Beret. He was also the Sniper Platoon Leader, and he served 22 months at the Frontline Combat Commander in Iraq and Afghanistan. He also is currently a public speaker and founder of Stronger Leaders, Stronger Profits, and he also is the co-founder and director of operations at Legion Jiu Jitsu in Nashville. So at this time, I want to introduce Sean Patton on the show. Sean, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, David, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
I appreciate it. You know, first of all, I want you to know I love comeback stories. And when I was putting the show together, I was reading about how your mom raised you, as a single parent, and she didn't receive any type of financial assistance. And if that wasn't enough, how she quit her job just to go back to school to give you guys or give you a better life. Tell us a little bit more, I guess, about where you were born and raised and what life was like being raised by a single parent.
Absolutely. So I was born in Kansas City, but I spent most of my childhood in Lawrence, Kansas, which is a small college town outside Kansas City, about 45 minutes where Kansas University is. And I was, my mom was a single mom and, was working at a hotel near the airport and had me. And, she was successful in her career, but realized that she was a maitre d', so she was in the service industry.
Sure.
So she was working nights a lot and hours are crazy. And, she realized she wasn't going to get a lot of time with me. And so she initially left that job and tried to open her own daycare so
right.
she could just be around me more and be an attentive parent. And then that, trying to run a at-home daycare out of an apartment in Kansas City, and we were basically near poverty levels. And so at that point, she decided to go back to school, and she went and got her undergrad and graduate degrees from University of Kansas in educational psychology, and became a school psychologist to work with special needs kids and provide a better life for us. And, what that really showed me as we lived in apartments, and I saw her, go to work every day, but also it wasn't just her struggle to be a better parent, but it was what she chose to do. It takes a special type of person. She just spent 30 years in the school district, half as a school psychologist and half as a special education administrator. And so our whole time, whether it was home taking care of me or whether it was at school taking care of, the most vulnerable populations. And it really taught me empathy and hard work, and that, life isn't just about things, it's about people and the impact you have. Right. And then, she got married when I was in junior high, and I had a great relationship with my stepfather, and he kind of showed me what being a man was like, honestly. And also, he went through some economic hard times, and then he showed resilience too, and just really worked hard with my mom to be a father figure. He taught me about goal setting. He taught me about, really planning out what I wanted to accomplish and what purpose I had. And so I was really blessed to just see that and really have a single mother as a child, and then in junior high school have a stepfather figure that really stepped in, and both were just great role models and showed me what hard work was and what it was, how life was about other people and your impact, not just yourself.
Wow, man. So how did you get to Nashville? Or what was the reason coming to Nashville?
So I left Kansas 3 weeks out of high school to attend the United States Military Academy at West Point in New York. And I was lucky enough to get selected and got a congressional nomination to go. And then I spent 4 years in New York at the military academy, and then was commissioned as a second lieutenant into the infantry. And my first unit choice and duty station that I selected was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is about 45 minutes outside Nashville, right on the Tennessee-Kentucky border.
Okay.
With the 101st Airborne Division. That was the unit I wanted to be in. And so after almost 2 years of training at Fort Benning, Georgia, I got to Fort Campbell and took over my first platoon. So that's what brought me to the Middle Tennessee area. And that was in 2006 when I arrived and took over a platoon that just gotten back from Iraq and dealt with that turnover, and then got that infantry platoon ready, because 12 months later we went to back to Iraq to Southwest Baghdad for 14 months. And while I was there, I was selected to take over the Scout and Sniper Platoon and leading a Sniper Platoon in Southwest Baghdad to finish up that rotation. And so that's what brought me here. And then later in my military career, I went to Special Forces Selection and happened to come back to Fort Campbell to 5th Special Forces Group. So I spent 7 of my 10 years as an officer at Fort Campbell and living in and around Middle Tennessee until I got out of the military in 2015.
Wow. I want to go ahead and actually touch base about your military experience and as a Green Beret and sniper and platoon leader. But, I forgot to mention this. A couple weeks ago, I had the show with Logan on the show, and we talked a lot about, jiu-jitsu and competition, and also about the kids program. We touched on bullying and how that related with jiu-jitsu. But today, I want to go ahead and talk more about what it was like, or more in depth, being in the Special Forces as a Green Beret. So deep down, what inspired you or gave you that urge to go into the military? Well, and let alone being a Green Beret. Did it just happen, or were you influenced by your stepfather, or?
No. So funny enough, I didn't really come from a military family, and my mom was very surprised when I told her that I wanted to go to West Point. My plan was to wrestle. I wrestled starting in junior high and had some success, and was on the Kansas national team, and so my plan was, one, I knew I wanted to go to college, and I knew we didn't have money for my parents to pay for me to go to college, so it was on me on getting that done. And I had some offers starting my sophomore, junior year with wrestling to go to some smaller D1 programs and some Division II programs in the Midwest. And so, I took hard classes just because I thought regular classes were kind of boring. So I took like AP classes and stuff like that. But I honestly never took the test. I never honestly studied really hard. Like, I studied because it was interesting, but grades were never really something it wasn't about getting a certain GPA or something. It was just about what I enjoyed learning. And because I knew, I was like, I'm going to go on a wrestling scholarship to college somewhere. And so what's the point? And that was kind of the plan until I guess about my junior year, end of my junior year. I think as I started to mature a bit. I started to become a little more worldly, right? And really started thinking through, well, where you go to college, what you study, influences greatly your opportunities professionally afterward, and kind of sets you on an important path in life. It can be very impactful. And so I wanted to take that a little more seriously and really start to put some thinking into like, well, what am I going to be? What am I going to do in this world? And I felt very fortunate, again, as I'm kind of a news buff. So sure. I still to this day, and even as a kid, was very interested in learning about the world and understanding the world and why things were like they were. Why was there conflict certain places? Why did some people have, why do we have one standard of living in this country and other people didn't? And I guess I gained an appreciation and quickly came to at least a rudimentary understanding that I was given this opportunity to live in this country and have the lifestyle I had. And even my mom, as a single mom in the 80s, she worked for it, but she still had the opportunity. There's some parts of the world where she would have never had the opportunity to do what she did. And I was appreciative of that. And I thought, well, why is that? Like, why do we have that here and not other places? And it's obviously a very complex problem set and thing to think about, but set of circumstances. But one thing I quickly realized was, well, other people fought and died for this.
Right.
Whether it was a Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War II, like Vietnam, what the reality was, you have to fight, and people have to die to create nations and to create freedom. And other people had done that for me. And there was a lot of violence in Palestine and Israel at the time. And I remember seeing like bombs going off at school bus stops and stuff like that in the news and thinking, man, I never had to worry about, my mom never sent me to a school bus stop worrying about a bomb going off because I was a certain race or a certain ethnicity, a certain religion.
Right.
And that was because people had sacrificed before me. And so I started to have this realization that I felt an obligation to pay that forward and do my part to make sure that sustained in this country moving forward. And so at that point, I started looking at ROTC or other opportunities to maybe I could combine those two things and serve my country, but also have another way to pay for school. And I found West Point, the military academy, and they have this whole person concept. So it's an Ivy League education, but they're not looking for, the genius in his mom's basement that's going to, find the new cure for cancer or write the new software. Sure. They're looking for leaders of men and women. And so they sort of have this scholar, athlete, warrior mentality, and that really resonated with me. And so I applied and ended up getting in, and that's what sort of set me on my course to go into the military.
Well, so let me ask you this, curious, were you training jiu-jitsu before you actually went into the military?
No. So I wrestled, and then I wrestled 2 years in college at West Point. And so I wrestled D1 for 2 years there. And then it was while I was in the Army and I was in Iraq, and I felt this hole in me. I didn't feel like myself, my identity. And what I realized was, like, I need to compete. Like, just as a human being. Right. I know that, win, lose, draw, whatever, if I'm pushing myself to compete in something and be competitive, it makes me a better person. It helps me focus. Even if you train for a year to go do a tournament somewhere, right, in like jiu-jitsu, and you lose your first match, you're still a better human being and a better jiu-jitsu fighter for that train up, for that experience, for putting yourself out there and overcoming that. And I missed the competition. And so, but it was really hard to train in the military, especially in the unit I was in. We were doing military training all the time. We were going out in the field, deploying. It was really hard to get into some sort of routine. So after I finished my time there and I got selected for Special Forces, I went for a 7-month school at Fort Knox, Kentucky for a captain's career course. And all officers, new captains have to go through this before they can go take command as a captain. Okay. And so I had like a 7-month, 8-month window there where I was working the Army 9 to 5, which is really like a 6 to 4, right? But it was still, I had kind of a regular schedule. And so I thought, well, this was the time when the UFC was getting really big, and I was I really loved UFC and MMA, and I was like, I want to do that. That's where I need to be. And so I started training at Derby City MMA up in Louisville. I would drive up there from Fort Knox and train, and started doing jiu-jitsu. And then there was I boxed a little bit at West Point too, and there were some people doing boxing. I started getting into that.
Okay.
Saw people start doing Muay Thai. I was like, well, that looks cool. So I started doing Muay Thai and jiu-jitsu, and just fell in love with the whole thing. And because of my wrestling background, the MMA coach up there, who is actually kind of jiu-jitsu famous, Nick Chewy Albin.
Yeah.
He's got a really popular YouTube channel. You probably know him, Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, on YouTube.
He was my first coach. Yeah, he was my first coach. He was a brown belt at the time.
Okay.
And the MMA coach. And because of my wrestling and stuff, he was like, man, would you come in and do some MMA with our guys? And that's what got me into mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu. And then I continued to train when I went out to Fort Bragg, North Carolina for special forces training. I continued to train out there, ended up fighting amateur MMA a little bit, and really got hooked there.
Okay.
When I went to 5th Special Forces Group and took command, I had to take a break for almost 3 years of training just because the operations tempo. You know, when I took over my first Special Forces team, 3 days later I was out at Coronado in California training with SEAL Team 5 and taking down ships underway, and we were doing cross training with them. And then we actually got called back from that in the middle of training to unpack, repack, and then, 3 weeks after that, I was on the Afghan-Pakistan border with my team. So it was just such a high tempo that I didn't have time to train. So I had to take about a 2-3 year break. But once I kind of came off the line and finished my command, I knew that jiu-jitsu was waiting for me, and I was ready to get back into it.
One of my nephews is actually going to be leaving soon to become a Navy SEAL, and I've watched him for it's been about 2 years, him training every day, swimming every day, maintaining his scores, and just a few months ago he did a series of interviews to go to officer school, and of course he went to college and graduated there. So far as he hasn't actually been denied in going to the officer school yet, so there's a chance that he might be going there. But let me ask you this: what's the difference between a Green Beret and then a Navy SEAL?
Now that's a great question. It's something I get all the time, right? I think people see these different groups inside of special operations,
sure, and
they think it's like a single silo, right? Like almost like a hierarchy that well, this is better than that and better than that. And what I tell people all the time is that wouldn't make a lot of sense to have multiple units that all do the same thing, right?
Sure.
And so you have an umbrella term, and these terms in the media and everywhere else get interchanged, so they get put out so wrong that it's no wonder kind of people don't understand the terminology. But
sure.
So special operations is an umbrella term for all the units that fall under U.S. SOCOM or Special Operations Command. So you have these special operations units that are sort of have dual, two bosses, right? Like in an admin sense, like the Navy SEALs fall under Department of the Navy, right? And they get and they're part of the Navy, they're funded by the Navy, but in terms of operational control, they fall under Special Operations Command. And so the Navy, Air Force, Marines under Department of Navy, and Army all have different types of special operations units.
Okay.
And so in terms of functionality, the Navy SEALs' primary job is to operate off the ships and do specialty sensitive missions for the Navy off the ships.
Okay.
So they operate in platoons of around mid 36 people in a SEAL platoon, and they might be like on an aircraft carrier somewhere, and then say they need to take down a ship, right? Maybe it's a hostage scenario. Maybe there's just a ship suspected of smuggling international waters, something like that. The SEALs would be the ones who would go board that ship and take down that ship, take control of a ship underway. Or if they need to do a mission to go and project force to do a raid or something like that, close to the water, right? They can launch from a ship into a foreign country, do a mission, come back.
Wow.
And so they operate unilaterally like that. And I would actually compare them in a sense to Army Rangers. So Army Rangers operate unilaterally, right, and without a lot of foreign, without like a partner foreign force, and they operate in platoons. But their primary mission is airfield search and seizure. So, for example, say we were going to go and invade a country. Well, we want to, in Iraq, for example, well, we want to take control of a major airport, right? So we could land our supplies and soldiers and stuff like that in. So Army Rangers would jump, like 130 Rangers would just jump out of the sky under fire and just blow stuff up and take the airfield so we could land stuff. So that's their primary mission. But they operate very similarly in the fact that the average age on a SEAL platoon and an Army Ranger platoon is their mid-20s, 24, 25. So they're young, very physically fit. Right. And they do mostly direct action missions. So, like I said, they do raids. If you need something blown up, shot, or go in and grab someone or do an attack, those are great units to do that. Green Berets are significantly different in the sense that their primary mission is unconventional warfare. And so where the Green Berets came from was in World War II, there was the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, and it was really the beginnings of the British SAS and beginnings of really special operations as we know it. And what they did is they created these 3-person Jedburgh teams, and you would have a specially trained officer. You would have a local national from some part in Europe, so maybe someone that fled France, that grew up in France or Belgium or some type of occupied territory. Sure. And then you would have a radio person, like a communications expert. And they trained these 3-person Jedburgh teams and then jumped them in behind Nazi lines, enemy lines. Gosh, and they would link up with the French resistance and gather intelligence and send it back. They would send disinformation, distribute disinformation to Nazis. They would coordinate and do covert action. And then when we invaded Normandy, they blew up rail lines and did assassinations and stuff to delay the reaction of the force. And that was sort of, yeah. So it's really interesting. I highly encourage people to research the OSS and Office of Strategic Services and how that all formed. Just incredible stories, right? Yeah. Well, after World War II, for a lot of reasons in this country, right, we have sort of an aversion, especially until the last 100 years, to having even a standing army, right? Because of our experience with the British, and especially having that sort of capacity. So we had this sort of moral dilemma after World War II as a country. I said, do we want to keep this? Do we want our government to have this capability? Is this something we want them to do? And we decided we did, but we wanted to split up the capability between civilian and military. And so basically from that experience with the OSS, we split that capability, and the civilian side became the CIA, and the military side became Army Special Forces. So the average age on a Green Beret team is in their low 30s, not in their 20s. They usually have, over a decade of experience in the military already. Everyone on that team is regionally aligned. So like in 5th Group, we operated in the Middle East and Southwest Asia. So everyone on my team spoke Farsi or Arabic.
Good grief. That's intense.
And we operated in teams of 12 or less. And so we operate by, with, and through. So sort of the quintessential Special Forces Green Beret mission, instead of acting like unilaterally with 30 Green Berets to go do an attack, would be Afghanistan, where teams primarily from 5th Group, but from other groups as well, 10th Group, 3rd Group, worked with the CIA and other intelligence services and snuck into Afghanistan behind enemy lines, Taliban-controlled country, linked up with the Northern Alliance or another guerrilla or militia group that was fighting to try to overthrow that government. And then you'd have a 12-man Green Beret team link up with 500 to 700 of these Afghanis, armed militiamen. And then you have to build rapport, and then you live with them, eat with them, train them, arm them, and then you lead them into battle. So you would have 12 Green Berets. That's where the Horse Soldiers, have you heard of that? Maybe in a movie about it.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so you would have a 12 Green Beret team with living in and with an indigenous force. And then you'd have, 2 Green Berets attached to, 60 of these militia fighters going into battle alongside them and then coordinating airstrikes and fighting in and amongst them. So that's the capability the Green Berets operate. And so it's a little different than the Navy SEALs or the Army Rangers, which I would equate their capabilities to be a little more similar.
Wow, man! So you served 22 months as a frontline combat commander in Iraq and Afghanistan. So you might as well have said 2 years.
Yeah.
And so for being on the front line for 2 years, you were dodging bullets. But let me ask you this: during the time that you were in the military, was there ever a time that was like a low point in your life, something that you went through that was a life-changing? I mean, was there, when you were in the military, of course, in Afghanistan and Iraq, was there a low point in your life when you were in the military when that was life-changing? I mean, did you go through anything like dodging a bullet or dodging a bomb or meeting somebody that was a person that was that changed your life?
Man, David, I'll tell you what, there was like 50 or 100 of those moments.
Really? Wow.
It's just such an intense experience. And people, when you're in, it's funny when you're even in the infantry in the regular army, or you're in a Sniper Platoon, you're just in the army or in the military in general, you're in this little bubble. And I spent my entire adult life in that bubble until 5 years ago. And you don't realize that's not the real world. Right? And then you go to like special forces and you're surrounded by the best human beings you've ever met. Right? Like, and you start to, that's your world and that's your like echo chamber. And so you start to think that, I mean, I knew when I was a Green Beret and I was working with Green Berets and Special Forces guys, that the people I worked with were different. Right? I knew that wasn't like normal. I knew we weren't normal. I knew we didn't live a normal life, but you don't realize how special those people are, how different they are. And even, in the regular army and the infantry, just how different and special those types of people are, because they've gone through such a filter, right? Like just to join the military, even if you're just going to be an admin desk person, like you still had to sign up to go in the military, which less than, 2% of the population does, right? So you're already in like top 2% of someone who's like making a selfless decision, who's willing to put yourself out there, take risks, go through basic training, and you're doing it for a higher purpose, or you have a commitment to something besides yourself.
Right.
You just selected out 98% of the population that's not even willing to do that.
Right.
And then you go through, well, now you decided to be in the infantry. So you could have gone in the military and, especially in the Army, 5% of the Army actually does fighting, right? Like 90 to 95% of the Army is the spear, and you only have a 5% that's the actual tip of the spear, that their primary mission is to close with, engage, and destroy the enemy. The rest of it is people, it takes a lot to feed, get ammo, get equipment, do admin stuff, transport them places, all that. So you've already then selected to do that. And then, then you have people that went to scout and snipers, training. And then you get to, out of that group, less than 1% of the Army becomes a Green Beret, right? So the people that you're dealing with and what they've gone through and the common experiences, the common mentality, just the mission first mentality. And that was one of the hardest things when I got out of the military to adapt to was, when you're on a special forces team and you give someone a task and they say, "Roger, I got it, sir," and they walk away, it gets done. Right? Like it gets done, or they come back in a bag. Like that's the mentality. But then you come to the civilian world and it's like the first obstacle they run into, like, hey, why isn't this done? I ran into this problem.
Okay, let me ask you.
Well, what the hell did you do about it, right?
Right. Let me ask you.
That mentality is so different.
Let me ask you this, Sean. One thing that I love about jiu-jitsu is the brotherhood you get when you train together. And honestly, I've been real fortunate, to train in Ohio, but I was telling Logan that I didn't know what I was getting myself into when I would start training and getting involved at Legion or Checkmat. And because my conception of Checkmat was they were very, very competitive, and they competed a lot and everything else, and so you have a lot of alpha males and everything else. As for myself, being in real estate is a stressful job, and it's very competitive. And when you train jiu-jitsu for an hour and a half, you're not thinking about real estate. You're not thinking about anything else but not getting choked. In your opinion, what is the similarities of jiu-jitsu and being in the military or being in the Green Beret? Is it the brotherhood? Is there any similarities, I guess, between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I really believe that, for a lot of veterans, like jiu-jitsu I know people whose lives it's saved. Because what I tell people about jiu-jitsu, and it's very similar in the military, just especially in special forces or in the military, I'd say it's even more, like, it's just more intense, right? So, like, I'll tell you what I think jiu-jitsu does for people and why it's so special. And then basically you can take everything I just said and just double or triple it, and that's sort of the sense you get in the military, right? What I tell people all the time is jiu-jitsu provides things you need to be a happy, content, and fulfilled human being that society and the way we currently live doesn't give you.
True.
And it fails to give you.
Wow.
And what I mean by that is, right, like down to the cellular level as a human, we've evolved to live in tribes of 80 to 120 people, right? To be surrounded by a group of people that has a common language, a common purpose, that is supporting of each other, that's sacrificing because they know they're going to have reciprocity and that person's going to sacrifice for them. And you have this sense of community and common purpose and goal and focus. And that's where we feel at home. And everyone feels that way. Like almost everyone that jiu-jitsu gets that out of it if they're in the right team. And that's same thing in the military. We need purpose as human beings, and we need a community striving toward that purpose together to feel our most content and fulfilled. You also need to do hard things. You need to struggle. Your body and mind are connected. So you need to get broken down. You need to overcome obstacles. You need to have failure in your life. You need to have that ego checked and have a consequence for if you go out, whatever, drinking at night or whatever, you just don't get enough sleep and then you come in, there's consequences for that. Wow. And you have to learn that and learn it really quickly. And it's this learning new tasks and having that sense of accomplishment to build you up. It's having your ego checked and being taught by elders, by people who have gone through this and are leading your way and mentoring you. And then it's your opportunity to mentor and be a teacher of others to share that communal knowledge that to rise up the people below you and the sense of accomplishment and purpose you get from that.
Wow.
And we need that as human beings, and society, doesn't give it to us. Society feeds us instant gratification in exchange for our dollars, right? Instant gratification, a dopamine hit for a social media like, so they can sell advertising dollars. They'll put you in front of your TV and watch crappy reality TV to get instant dopamine hits, so they can have you sit there on a couch and watch an ad, and then someone's going to pay them for it. Like, that's how society is set up. And so you have to fight that, and you have to get to how we're actually supposed to live. And jiu-jitsu can provide that for you if you're in the right environment. Mm-hmm. And that's why people get addicted to it. That's why you crave it. You need it. That's why you feel like yourself when you're there, and you have a sense of connection with the people that you do it with in a way that you don't have with hardly anyone outside of it. And I would say take everything I just said, ramp that up about 500%, and that's what it's like to be on a special forces team.
Sean, I've interviewed people like Andre Gavon, and I've interviewed Pedro Sauer and Gracie's, and honestly, you've explained jiu-jitsu and you connected why we are addictive and everything else. I mean, that was what you just said was extremely inspiring. That was amazing. But you know what? Let me mention this to you. I had all intentions, Sean, to go ahead and to talk about your company, Stronger Leaders, Stronger Profits. And I want to go ahead and just save that for another episode. I know you're hard to get a hold of and everything else, but you do have businesses that you have to run and everything else. So that being said, I want to go ahead and I usually end up asking the person that I'm interviewing what I call super questions, and then we'll go ahead and wrap things up if that's all right with you.
Perfect.
Okay. So the first question, Sean, let me see. What's one word that best describes you?
Purpose.
See, man, you're getting really deep, man. I don't know, man. Maybe you ought to be a psychologist or something. Okay. Okay. Let me see. What is one of your biggest pet peeves. Now, this can relate to either running your academies. It can relate to your new wife. Did you just get married?
I did a year ago. We just had our 1-year anniversary.
Okay, and you just moved into a new home, man. Awesome.
Yeah.
So what's one of your biggest pet peeves?
For me, my number one pet peeve in life, in business, in jiu-jitsu, in athletics, in anything is apathy. I hate it. I don't relate to apathetic people. I don't relate to people who don't have gratitude for what they have in life, and take things for granted, and take a nihilistic approach to life. Like, what's the point?
So people that
who waste that experience.
So people that are negative, they're not positive. Is that what you're saying in regards to apathy then?
Yeah, and not just positive. Like, I'm okay if someone isn't necessarily positive all the time, right? Life ups and downs. What I'm not okay with is people who don't have gratitude and perspective and are so self-absorbed that they feel entitled to things. And I have like a whole tattoo on my arm that is I got as a reminder to myself as I got out of the military, and I know, God forbid, sit there listening to a boring story about, like, let me tell you this tattoo story, right? Really quickly, basically, right, it has a representation of different great civilizations throughout our time as human beings. And at the top of it has Leonardo da Vinci's ideal man representing the Enlightenment. And what it shows is, in my mind, this is just my perspective on life, every great civilization in the history of man has grown out of struggle and sacrifice and commitment to a certain set of ideals, right, wrong, and different at the time. Just a strong sense of this is who we are, and leading people to do that. And people sacrifice, dying, building amazing engineering feats, accomplishing things. And then you get to a certain point, and then life gets easy. And you see that with almost all great civilizations, where then the citizenry, the people, life gets so easy that they're not willing to struggle. And then all these countries move away from a volunteer military force, for example, and they start using mercenaries, or they start using slaves, or they start using something else. And people aren't willing to sacrifice, and they take for granted the standard of living they have, and they get soft and they get weak, and they don't see that they're only living that way because of the struggle and sacrifice of others. And then I have a Beglafor, which in Catholicism is the demon associated with the deadly sin of sloth, of laziness. And then it's sitting on a rubbled Colosseum, and then under the tattoo it says, apathy ends all. And it's just a reminder to me, and I think that's sort of a microcosm of what I'm trying to describe, which is this sense of a lack of purpose, a lack of obligation to be your best self. Because I'm a firm believer, and one of the things that drives me every day at like a meta level is I can imagine where we could be as a world, as a country, as a community, as a human race. Imagine where we could be if generations before us, if every person, or even a majority of people, really strove and pushed themselves to be the best human being they could be. Imagine where we could be. We don't have to have the type of conflict we have. We don't have to have war. We don't have to have this type of poverty. We don't have to have suffering. We don't have to have people committing violence against other people. We don't have to have any of that. That's all voluntary stuff that we are living in because other people have been selfish and apathetic to their own lifestyle. And people who don't see things that way and are too self-absorbed and don't feel an obligation to make the world, to make their life matter.
Right.
I don't relate to that.
Wow. Well said. Okay, last question. Tell me something true that almost nobody agrees with you on.
That's a great question.
Hey, while you think of that answer, I want you to know, for the people that are listening, Sean, you actually have your black belt in jiu-jitsu, and I think last year, if I'm correct, you competed in one of the largest jiu-jitsu tournaments, the World's Masters, and you received the gold. Is that correct?
Yeah, I won Masters World Championships as a brown belt last year, and got my black belt on the podium from Professor Gabriel and Ricardo Vieira from Checkmate, and it was amazing.
Wow, man, that's amazing too. Okay, so anyway, I gave you some time, so tell me your answer.
Okay, something that I feel like there's so much, and then I'm drawing a blank on that.
That's right.
I would say that one thing that I believe that most people don't is, or disagree with me on, is I believe that every person has the potential to be great and change the world. I really believe that down to my core, and I believe it's strictly mindset, and I believe that, and it can. So I'll give you a good example. So in doing some of my training, I was doing some training with some online training, a leadership workshop with some folks, and one of the things that I pointed out was, I said, look, basically anxiety, and I'm not speaking about certain people's like chemical imbalances in their brain, so like I know that.
Okay.
But if you look at the amount of people that are prescribed, the amount of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, the pills that people are, and the self-diagnosed, I just have terrible anxiety. You're like, no, you're not living your life correctly. You're not making the right decisions. You're not having the right perspective. Like, how can you have the life that you have? If you have a roof over your head, if you have a bank account, just an American bank account with $1 in it, you're in the top 10% wealthiest people on the planet. Right?
Okay, say that one more time. Say that again.
So if you have an American bank account with even $1 in it, right? Just statistically, if you have an account at a U.S. bank,
okay,
you are in the top 10 wealthiest people on the entire planet. So the fact that drives me crazy, and it offends people, because they're like, well, you don't know my life, right? Like, you don't,
right.
I've been through things, and I'm not saying you haven't, and I'm saying, but you're not supposed to be happy all the time.
Right.
Like, sometimes life sucks, and you're supposed to suffer, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means you're a human being, and it means you need to figure something out. Like, you need to change something you're doing. You need to change your mindset and change perspective. And, the way I look at it is, if there's somebody in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Sudan, right, that is living a day-to-day life that would literally cut off an arm to have your life, to have the opportunities you have today. And how can you take that perspective and then throw it down the trash, or have just this, as a country, we have this sort of cultural depression and cultural anxiety, amount of drugs that are being prescribed. And I truly believe it's mindset, and you can overcome it. And I'm not saying that it's easy. I'm not saying it's not going to be difficult and you're going to struggle and you're going to go through things acutely. But I truly believe you can overcome anything with mindset and effort, and I wish more people believed in themselves that way.
Wow, awesome. Hey, Sean, before we wrap things up, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you or to know a lot more about you? Is it a website or social media?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to my website is strongerleaderstrongerprofits.com, and I've got a lot of resources on there. I've got articles and stuff like that, and videos of past podcasts and content. And then you can also contact me on there. And then also I'm on social media under Sean Patton on LinkedIn and Facebook, and on Instagram under Sean Patton Presents. So definitely, like I said, I know we'll do another one. We'll talk about the business and leadership coaching, but whether it's jiu-jitsu, life, if you're a veteran, if you're someone that's struggling with something, if you're struggling with mindset, if you're an entrepreneur, anything like that, I just want to provide value to others. And so everyone, please feel free to reach out, and there's no dumb questions. And I just want to connect and put give a positive impact to everyone that I possibly can.
Awesome. Well, that's about all we have for today's show. But before we go, a lot of you guys know that I'm an advocate against bullying. And one of the ways that you can fight against bullying is just bringing awareness. And one of the ways that you can do that, you can just share the show that we have with Sean Patton that has been inspiring and motivational either on your Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Secondly, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, it doesn't cost you anything. All you have to do is just go to my website at www.davebond.org, and you can click on the banner that says subscribe. And then all you'll receive is a notice that a new show is available. So until next time, thanks for listening.